Barren woman. The words echoed through the neighborhood like a curse, followed by the sound of breaking china. Inside the modest home, another morning began with the familiar rhythm of Odinaka's rage. The morning light crept through the window, casting long shadows across the kitchen where Ian sat alone, her untouched breakfast growing cold before her. In the 4 years of her marriage to Odinaka, mornings had become a dreaded affair, each sunrise bringing with it the weight of her perceived failure. Today would prove no different. Odinaka stood in the doorway, watching his wife with eyes that held no warmth. His thoughts, dark and bitter, swirled with the resentment that had been building over their childless years. The sight of her eating eggs particularly irritated him today, though he knew the connection he was about to make was cruel. He didn't care. Look at how you're devouring the offspring of another, he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. Your mates are having babies, and you're here eating eggs that you cannot even lay. The words hit their mark with precision. Ian's hand trembled as she set down her fork, tears welling in her eyes. She pushed the plate away, her appetite vanishing like morning mist. The food before her, once appetizing, now seemed to mock her with its presence. Her husband's words cut deep, but they were merely the latest in an endless barrage of cruel remarks that had become her daily bread. In the oppressive silence that followed, both husband and wife carried their own burdens. Odinaka harbored his desperate desire for an heir, his masculinity somehow tied to his wife's fertility in his mind. This frustration had twisted into a poison that he willingly administered to Ian each day, believing her suffering might somehow cure their childlessness. Ian's thoughts drifted to the hospital visit from weeks prior, a memory that haunted her like a persistent shadow. The doctor's words still echoed in her mind. Fibroid, surgery, IVF. Each term carried its own weight of implications, each representing another hurdle in her journey to motherhood. But what the medical professionals couldn't see, what no ultrasound could detect, was the deeper malady, a marriage infected with bitterness, a home devoid of compassion. As Odinaka turned to leave, his shadow falling across Ian like a physical manifestation of his dominance, neither of them could know that fate was already weaving a tapestry of events that would transform their lives. The tears that fell from Ian's eyes onto the abandoned breakfast would prove to be just the beginning of a story that would test the limits of human cruelty and resilience. In the grand scheme of their universe, larger forces were at work. While Ian sat in her prison of matrimonial suffering, across town, a single father named Ukena was seeking help with his motherless child. The threads of their lives were about to intertwine in ways neither could imagine. But for now, in this moment, there was only the sound of Ian's quiet sobs and the echo of Odinaka's footsteps as he walked away, leaving his wife to drown in her sorrow. The morning sun continued its journey across the sky, indifferent to the drama unfolding beneath it. In homes across the neighborhood, other wives were indeed nursing babies, changing diapers, and living the life that Ian desperately yearned for. But destiny, in its infinite wisdom, had charted a different course for Ian, one that would lead her through the valley of despair before showing her the peaks of joy. The sterile walls of the hospital seemed to close in around Ian as she sat in the consultation room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The doctor's words hung in the air like heavy smoke. Fibroid, surgery, IVF. Each term carried the weight of both hope and despair, a cruel paradox that only those in her situation could truly understand. Outside the window, birds soared freely across the sky, their flight a stark contrast to the cage of circumstances that imprisoned her. Back home, Odinaka paced their living room like a caged lion, his mind already made up before Ian could even present her case. He knew she would ask for money, money he had no intention of providing. In his heart, a bitter seed had taken root, growing into a thorny vine that choked any remnants of compassion he might have once possessed. "Do you think I am a money-making machine?" The words exploded from him the moment Ian mentioned the surgery. His face contorted with a familiar mix of disgust and disappointment. "Your mates are carrying babies in their wombs while you're here carrying diseases." The universe, in its infinite wisdom, watched as Ian absorbed this latest blow. Her shoulders, already heavy with years of verbal abuse, somehow found the strength to bear this new burden. What Odinaka couldn't see, or perhaps chose not to see, was the steel forming in his wife's spine, the quiet determination taking root beneath her tears. Across town, in a modest but well-kept home, Ukena stood over his sleeping 2-year-old son, his heart heavy with a different kind of pain. The ghost of his late wife seemed to hover in every corner. Her absence felt most keenly in the simple daily tasks of childcare. He had no way of knowing that the solution to his struggles was currently wiping away tears in another man's house, just as Ian had no inkling that her salvation would come through caring for another woman's child. The days that followed saw Ian transform from a desperate housewife into a woman of action. She took on cleaning jobs, her hands raw from washing other people's clothes, her back aching from scrubbing floors. Each coin earned was carefully saved, each payment bringing her one step closer to the surgery she needed. The same hands that Odinaka deemed worthless were now turning strangers' chaos into order, though he remained blind to her quiet revolution. When fate finally orchestrated her meeting with Ukena, it did so through a simple newspaper advertisement seeking a nanny. The universe, it seemed, had a poet's touch for irony. The woman deemed Barren would find healing through mothering another's child. The position offered more than just financial compensation. It presented an opportunity to prove, if only to herself, that her capacity for love and nurture remained intact despite years of being told otherwise. Walking into Ukena's home for the first time, Ian felt a curious mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. The baby's room, painted in soft yellows and blues, held none of the judgment she had grown accustomed to at home. The child, with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages, reached for her without hesitation. In that moment, something deep within her began to heal, though the path ahead remained uncertain. Ukena, watching from the doorway, saw something in Ian that went beyond mere qualifications. Perhaps it was the gentle way she handled his son, or the shadow of pain behind her smile that resonated with his own loss. Whatever it was, he knew instinctively that he had found more than just a nanny. Meanwhile, in their modest home, Odinaka remained unaware of the transformation taking place in his wife. He continued his daily routine of criticism and contempt, not realizing that each harsh word now served only to strengthen her resolve. The money she earned, carefully hidden away, grew slowly but steadily, much like the quiet confidence that began to straighten her spine and lift her chin. What none of them could know was that destiny was merely setting its stage. The fibroid that had caused so much strife would soon reveal itself to be a shield for a miracle, and the tears shed in Ukena's nursery would water the seeds of a love story none of them saw coming. But for now, Ian continued her silent battle, finding strength in the weak smile of a motherless child, and hope in the kind eyes of a man who saw her worth without requiring her to prove it. The evening shadows stretched long across Odinaka's living room as he sat in his favorite chair, darkness gathering both outside and within his heart. His fingers drummed against the armrest, each tap echoing the whispers he'd heard in the marketplace. His wife, spending days in another man's house, caring for another's child. The gossip had wormed its way into his mind, feeding the monster of suspicion that had long resided there. Through the window, he could see the exact moment Ian turned onto their street, her tired steps carrying her home from another day at Ukena's house. The sight of her approaching filled him with a volatile mixture of possessive anger and wounded pride. What right did she have to find purpose outside their home when she had failed in her most basic duty to him? "Where are you coming from?" The question sliced through the air the moment she stepped through the door, though he knew perfectly well the answer. His tall frame rose from the chair, casting a long shadow across the floor between them. "From work," Ian replied quietly, setting her bag down with the careful movements of someone trying not to startle a dangerous animal. The day's warmth from caring for Ukena's child still lingered in her heart, but it began to cool under her husband's fierce gaze. "Work?" Odinaka's laugh held no humor. "You mean from your lover's house?" He watched the confusion spread across her face, savoring the moment like a predator toying with its prey. "Don't play dumb with me. I've heard the gossip. You spending all day in another man's house, laughing with him, playing mother to his child." In another part of town, oblivious to the storm brewing in Ian's home, Ukena sat in his study reviewing patient files. His thoughts occasionally drifted to the remarkable transformation in his son since Ian's arrival. The house felt warmer somehow, as if her presence had begun to fill the void his wife's death had left. He pushed such thoughts aside, reminding himself of professional boundaries, unaware that at that very moment, his name was being wielded as a weapon in another man's household. Back in the dimly lit living room, Ian's world was crumbling yet again. "He is my boss," she defended, her voice stronger than she felt. "I take care of his baby, that is all." But even as she spoke, she knew her words would find no purchase in the barren soil of Odinaka's trust. "So now you're defending him?" Odinaka's voice rose, filling the small room. "You have time to care for another man's child, but you cannot give me my own? Maybe if you spent less time playing mother to another man's son, you would finally be able to have children of your own." The universe held its breath as Ian stood there, absorbing these latest blows. But something had changed in her. Perhaps it was the months of earning her own money, or the daily affirmation of her worth in Yukena's household. But she found herself standing straighter, her voice steadier. "I am doing this for us, Odinaka," she said, her voice trembling not with fear, but with suppressed anger. "I work hard every day to raise money for my surgery, for the IVF that costs so much money." "Shut up." Odinaka's roar cut through her words. "I am your husband, and I will not have my wife running around another man's house like a shameless woman. You will quit that job immediately, and my decision is final." The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. In it, Ian could hear the echo of her younger self, the woman who would have immediately acquiesced to her husband's demands. But that woman was gone, transformed by months of independence and self-discovery. "Quit and do what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sit here and wait for you to insult me every day like you used to?" The darkness in Odinaka's eyes deepened to something dangerous. "If you don't leave that job, then get ready to leave my house." What neither of them knew was that fate had already set in motion events that would make this ultimatum moot. For at that very moment, in a small clinic across town, a woman named Amaka sat reviewing her latest prenatal checkup results, her hand resting protectively over the secret growing in her womb, Odinaka's child. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, was orchestrating a symphony of consequences. Soon, all would be revealed. Odinaka's hypocrisy, Amaka's pregnancy, and most surprisingly of all, a miracle hidden within Ian's own body, masked by what everyone had assumed was merely a fibroid. But for now, in the growing darkness of their living room, husband and wife stood locked in a battle of wills. Ian's mind raced to Yukena's offer of a salary increase, to the warmth of his household, to the love she had found in caring for his child. Odinaka's thoughts churned with possession, pride, and the secret knowledge of the child he had created with another woman. The night air grew heavy with unspoken truths and impending revelations. Change was coming, swift and unstoppable as a summer storm. And none of them, not Ian, not Odinaka, not even Ukena in his quiet study, were prepared for the deluge that would wash away the old order of their lives. The hospital corridors buzzed with an energy that seemed to pulse through its sterile white walls. In one wing, Ian lay on the operating table, her consciousness drifting as the anesthesia took hold. The surgical team moved with practiced precision, preparing for what they thought would be a routine fibroid removal. None of them could have predicted the miracle they were about to discover. The lead surgeon's sharp intake of breath broke the methodical rhythm of the operating room. "Wait," she commanded, her eyes fixed on the ultrasound screen. "This isn't just fibroid." The team gathered around, their expressions morphing from professional detachment to amazement. "She's 9 months pregnant." In that moment of discovery, Ian's world shifted on its axis, though she remained unaware in her sedated state. The baby, hidden all these months behind what everyone had assumed was merely a fibroid, had been growing quietly, defying medical expectations and her husband's cruel judgments. Across the hospital, in a different wing, fate was writing a different story. Odinaka sat slumped in a hard plastic chair, his face buried in his hands as he absorbed the devastating news. Amaka, his pregnant mistress, had lost their baby. The son he had hoped would prove his manhood, the child he had used to torture Ian with his superiority, was gone before taking his first breath. The universe, with its peculiar sense of poetry, had orchestrated these parallel moments with exquisite timing. As one life slipped away, another announced its presence with a powerful cry that echoed through the delivery room where Ian had been quickly transferred. Ukena, who had accompanied Ian to what they thought would be her fibroid surgery, stood outside the delivery room, his heart racing with a mixture of concern and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. He had watched over months as Ian transformed from a broken woman into someone who glowed with quiet strength. Now, hearing the baby's first cry, he felt tears spring to his eyes. News traveled through the hospital corridors like electricity through copper wire. The nurses who passed Odinaka offered no comfort. They had witnessed his cruelty during Ian's previous visits. His suffering now seemed a fitting response to the universe's sense of justice. When Odinaka finally found the courage to seek out Ian's room, he moved like a man walking to his own execution. But the scene he encountered stopped him cold in the doorway. There was Ian, radiant despite her exhaustion, cradling a perfect baby girl. Ukena stood nearby, his protective presence a silent testament to the new order of things. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," Odinaka began, falling to his knees beside her bed. "I was blind. I was a fool. I let my pride and desperation drive me to do unspeakable things. If I could turn back time, I would treat you like the queen that you are." Ian looked down at him, and in her eyes was something Odinaka had never seen before. Not anger, not hatred, but a calm, unwavering strength. "You want my forgiveness, Odinaka?" Her voice was steady, carrying the weight of every tear she had ever shed. "I forgave you the day you threw me out like trash. That day, I decided you would no longer have control over my happiness." The baby stirred in her arms, and Ian's attention shifted immediately to her daughter, a love she had always been capable of, but had never been allowed to express. "But forgiveness," she continued, her eyes still on her child, "doesn't mean a second chance. You went to my family to request for my bride price," she reminded him, her voice carrying years of accumulated pain. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone that I hold dear. The moment you did that, Odinaka, our marriage ended." Odinaka's shoulders slumped as the truth of her words sank into his bones. He could see clearly now what he had destroyed, what he had thrown away in his blind pride and cruelty. With one last look at the child he would never know, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like the last beats of a dying dream. In the quiet that followed his departure, Ukena stepped closer to Ian's bed. His hand found hers, and in that simple touch was the promise of everything she had been denied: kindness, respect, love freely given without conditions or cruel demands. The afternoon sun streamed through the hospital window, casting a golden glow over mother and child. Outside, life in the city continued its endless cycle. But within that room, a new world had been born, not just in the form of a miracle baby, but in the rebirth of a woman who had finally found her true worth. Time, that great healer of wounds, moved forward with gentle persistence. The seasons change, marking the rhythms of new life and fresh beginnings in Ukena's household. The home that had once echoed with the hollow sounds of loss now rang with the laughter of two children, his son Obina and Ian's daughter Chisholm, their voices intertwining like streams flowing into the same river. Ian watched them play from the kitchen window, her heart full with the joy she had once thought impossible. Her daughter, now taking her first toddling steps, reached constantly for Obina's hand, and he, 3 years her senior, had taken to his role as protective big brother with a seriousness that made both parents smile. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, had woven together these broken pieces into something beautiful and whole. Ukena found himself increasingly drawn to the quiet moments, watching Ian read stories to both children, seeing her tend to scrape niece with equal tenderness, observing how she had transformed his house into a home. The love growing in his heart was different from what he had known before. It was mature, patient, born from shared understanding and mutual respect. For her part, Ian discovered that healing came in waves. Some days, the memory of Odinaka's cruelty would surface unexpectedly, like a shadow passing across the sun. But increasingly, these memories lost their power to hurt her. They became merely stories from a past life, lessons that had shaped but no longer defined her. The first time Ukena's fingers brushed against hers as they put the children to bed, neither pulled away. When their eyes met over the sleeping forms of their children, they saw in each other not just the reflection of past pain, but the promise of future joy. Love, when it finally bloomed between them, came as naturally as sunrise after a long night. I've been thinking, Ukena said one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the children chase fireflies in the garden. Our family, it already exists in every way that matters. Perhaps it's time to make it official. Ian's heart, once so guarded, had learned to trust again. In Ukena's gentle question, she heard everything he wasn't saying. His respect for her pace, his understanding of her fears, his promise of continued patience. The smile that spread across her face was answer enough. Their wedding was a quiet affair, witnessed by close family and friends who had watched their love story unfold. The children, dressed in their finest, beamed with pride as they watched their parents exchange vows. Chisholm, barely steady on her feet, scattered flower petals with gleeful abandon, while Obina solemnly carried the rings, understanding in his child's heart that something momentous was taking place. What made this ceremony different from Ian's first was not just the man standing beside her, but the woman she had become. She stood straight and proud, her eyes clear and bright, her heart no longer carrying the burden of proving her worth. The love surrounding her was not a desperate achievement, but a natural flowering of mutual respect and understanding. In the years that followed, their blended family became a testament to love's healing power. The children grew together, their bond so natural that visitors often couldn't tell they weren't biological siblings. Ukena's medical practice flourished, and Ian, who had once been told she was worthless, discovered her talent for counseling other women going through similar struggles. Sometimes, news of Odinaka would reach them through mutual acquaintances. He had never remarried, carrying the weight of his actions like a cross. But Ian had meant what she said about forgiveness. She wished him no ill will, hoping he had learned from his mistakes and found peace. Life settled into a rhythm of joy punctuated by the everyday challenges that face any family. There were skin knees to kiss, homework to supervise, and occasional disagreements to resolve. But even in difficult moments, there was never any doubt about the foundation of love and respect upon which their home was built. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the house was still, Ian would sometimes stand in the doorway of their room, watching them dream. Ukena would find her there, wrapping his arms around her waist, both of them marveling at the miracle of their family, not the one they had planned, but the one fate had carefully crafted for them. In these moments, Ian understood that life's greatest blessings often come disguised as its cruelest challenges. Her journey had taught her that true love doesn't demand proof of worth, but rather reveals the worth that was always there. In the end, she had found not just a husband, but a partner, and not just a home, but a sanctuary, and not just acceptance, but celebration of who she was. And so their story continued, not with the desperate passion of youth, but with the steady, deep love of those who have weathered storms and found in each other a safe harbor. Their home became a testament to second chances, to the power of kindness, and to the truth that family is not just about blood, but about the daily choice to love and cherish one another.